Hello, everyone. Welcome back with another Candid Craic. And today we have someone in India, and I'm co-hosting it with Richard. Welcome, Richard.
It's been a while, Oscar. Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a while indeed. Right, Vandana, introduce yourself before I do the introduction, but I think it's always better that the speaker itself introduces. There you go.
Okay, hi, I'm Vandana Saxena Poria. From the accent, you can probably tell that I was born and brought up in the UK. Qualified as a chartered accountant, worked in Eastern Europe for 10 years with Ernst & Young. Then I set up the international division of a listed company. Set up a company, it was bought out by a listed company. Then I ran their international division. Then I moved to India, and that was in 2005. And I'm giving you this background because my job title is the Chief Alarmist of the Human Alarm Clock. So when I say that, people are just like, yeah, what? Yeah, exactly. What do you do? So that's why I'm kind of giving you the background to it. So I moved to India in 2005. I've spent the last 17 years in India, working mainly in India, but also across the world in Southeast Asia and across in the US and the UK as well. And what I found is that people are fundamentally unhappy with the way their lives are going. And it doesn't matter if I'm talking about ministers or royalty or the street cleaner next door. There's some general unease about the way they're living their lives. And so I started looking at all the different countries I'd lived in, and I looked at where I was living in India, because India is really like an onion. It's got so many different layers going on at the same time. And I started to realize that social norms that were invented like thousands of years ago are still running people's minds. And I started to go into mindset. And I call myself the Chief Alarmist because I work with people and organizations to disrupt those social norms so that they can see different things and they can then run their lives differently or live their lives differently. So, has that kind of answered the question?
That's a great introduction, Vandana. Yeah, because actually my second question was, why do you call yourself the Chief Alarmist? But you actually answered that question. Right, Richard.
Yeah, I want, first of all, let's start off with, what is an example of these social norms that you disrupt?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I'm just going to try and think of a really simple one. Okay, there's a lot of discussion about women and men in the workplace, right? So diversity is a big issue. And we know we need more women at the top of the organization. A lot of people kind of quote, so what's happened historically, and a social norm is that men are the ones who work, and especially in India, they will be the main breadwinner, and the wife comes in and her main job is to look after the home. And yes, she can have a career, but it's very much secondary to the man. And that's caused challenges in the workplace because male-dominated workplaces have now got some females. Is the female voice coming out? I'm not sure. So what I do is I go in and I kind of like analyze the workplace and see what norms are kind of playing out in that workplace. And then I will do something to disrupt them. So for example, I will, and we did this as one of our drinking dialogue sessions, I'll get people to, through their imagination, imagine that the history that we have had has changed. Because if you think that 80% of our history has been written by men and about men, 80% of our religion, 80% of art and literature, it's not a good or bad thing. It's just that what is out there in most public domains is 80% male. And so we have an 80% male dominance on the view of the world as it is. And even though women are 50% of the population, there's not much of their view. And so I get people to imagine if the world had always been female dominated, how could it look? How would it look different to the workplace today? So, for example, would work have even been set up as 9 to 5? Would that fit with women and women's schedule, especially knowing that they go through, you know, sort of pregnancy, bringing up kids, etc., etc.? Would they have a 9 to 5? Would it be Monday to Friday? Would you have work with the kind of profit as the motive? Would that be the biggest motive? I don't know the answers to these questions, but when you start thinking about these, it disrupts the way you were thinking about the world. I don't know if that's given you some insight.
Yes, yeah, that's a very, very clear answer. And what kind of insights do they get? So once you've gone through, and I know you have multiple kind of social norms, but what kind of insights do people get, and where do the companies go?
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant question. So we now realize things are going to be different. So now it's up to them as a group. Often I'll do this with groups. I'll do it with different types of groups. I might do it with all millennial men, for example, or all sort of professional women, or multi-generational and multi-diversity. But we'd get a group of them and say, okay, create this female world. So once they've got their idea of this is what they value, etc., etc., with that lens, we ask them to look back at their workplace and say, what problem do you spot, and how would you solve it with your new world thinking? So, for example, we had one group that came in, and they said that women in general, when they come to work, and this could be men, but their assumption was this was mainly women, they'd come in with all the thoughts of what happened this morning. And in an Indian household, that will be discussions with the in-laws, having to get the husband's lunch ready, honestly, or at least get the maid to get the lunch ready, get the kids off to school or online school. All of this is in their head, and probably a conversation from the weekend. Now they go into the workplace, they've got all of this in their head, and now the boss is saying, I want you to get this proposal out. Now, what's eating up her share of mind at the moment? It's everything that just happened over the weekend. So she's trying to clear space to finish that report, but these nagging thoughts keep coming in, right? So this is the picture that this one particular group saw. And they said, what could we do to stop that from happening or make it better for the woman? And they said, and this was in non-COVID times, so this happened before COVID. They said, what you should do is before you get into the workplace, you should literally have a room that you can go through, where in that room you could either put headphones on, listen to really loud music, get your energy out, you know, like kind of scream and shout or whatever. Or maybe it's a gym room where you kind of like box it out. Or maybe it's a room where you just go into where there's beautiful music just to calm you down for 5 minutes before you walk into the workplace. And to do the same on your way home in the evening. So it's just taking a different type of thinking, because they said in the women's world, people will be much more concerned about what is their mental state. And that's something that we don't see. We hear people talking about it, but we don't see any action around it. Here's a tangible thing you could do. What about creating rooms, breakout rooms in Zoom before you have your actual meeting? So you can actually go and work out your anger or talk to somebody, etc., so that you're 100% ready for the meeting when it starts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised you struggle to say what you do, because this is very different from the sort of a standard business or job description. So it takes me to sort of another question, which is, what about resistance to this kind of training? Yeah, do you experience any, and how do you deal with that?
A huge amount of resistance, because you know what's happened, I think, over I'm asserting, and I guess millions of others are asserting, is over the years we've got so used to looking for satisfaction outside, right, and not inside. So we're turning to our phones, we're turning to Netflix, we're turning to everything that's out there. We don't like going in. And the challenge with this training is it forces you to go in. And if people aren't used to doing that, if they're not used to understanding who they are and understanding their preferences and spending time on self-development, this can be really confronting. and it gets the amygdala kind of going off big time in the brain, which of course, as you know, shuts down the growth and learning centers. So there is a certain amount of resistance. So what I do is, you know, everything in life is a process. And I study Tibetan, the science of Tibetan healing with a doctor in Pune. And Tibetan philosophy is based on this idea that everything is a process. So if somebody's not ready for this kind of training, and most people aren't, I have to do something with them beforehand that can prime them, can get them kind of ready to explore, or to say, you know what, I don't want to explore. And that's absolutely fine too. And so I've got these various kind of like half-day or one-day workshops that I do, where I get people to very, very gently, my motto is be playful, courageous, and curious. Very playfully, using fiction, go into themselves. So I get them to work out what their strongest memories are, and I get them to extract from those memories what they actually really value in life. And when they see, oh, wow, I thought I just really enjoyed that party, but actually what I'm looking for is belonging, or I really enjoyed watching that documentary, and actually what I love is being curious. When they discover a few things about themselves, they're then ready to try something new. So it's a very slow process. It's taken me 13 years to get where I am today. But that's what I do. That's how I work with them.
Well, I have a bunch of questions related to that, but I'll pass it over to Oscar to see if he's got anything first.
I've got a quick question, because you mentioned you started this pre-COVID, and I guess I'm interested in your practices, right? Because in person now everything is, I guess, in India, are people still in lockdown? So
I mean, kind of, but yes, most things are online.
In a virtual space. So how and you were mentioning about mindsets and attitudes. Have you seen any? What has the change been in India in terms of attitude?
Oh, it's been incredible, and I think the same all over the world. People have been forced to spend time with themselves, and so it has opened up a lot of questions for people. And people are ready to do online. In some ways, online and internal development is a really good combination, because nobody can see you. You can put the camera off, but still do those activities very seriously. And I teach mindfulness with some mindfulness experts, and there's something called the raisin meditation, and it's where you actually need raisins, and you kind of do some activities with the raisins. The thing is, if you were in a classroom, you would be really uncomfortable, because, you know, when the teacher says to you, hold up the raisin and look at the raisin, you'd be kind of looking at your peers. But here, because you're doing it on your own in a classroom, you actually feel, in your own home, you actually feel really safe. So I'm looking for practices that help people feel safe. And actually online for the first part of the priming is fantastic.
What is the raisin exercise? I'm curious what that actually is.
It's an old Buddhist practice, Tibetan Buddhist practice, where you have two raisins, and your mindfulness teacher will take you through a meditation where they get you to kind of examine the raisin and then think about its past. So think about the fact that it was one day a grape, and before that it was on a tree, and before that it was a seed, and where has it come from? And then also think about, okay, to get to you, what did the farmer tended to it, and all of this. And all they're doing during that process, well, there's so many things happening on so many levels, but you're being completely distracted. It's such an interesting story. And you look at that raisin and you really do think, and then you put it, and you don't want to put it in your mouth, right? You don't, because you've like now grown attached to this raisin, and you put it in your mouth, and then you've got to kind of swill it around and think about the flavors. And it's a beautiful introduction to what mindfulness is, because too many people have the wrong idea of what mindfulness is. So that's what it is.
So I think my response would be, it's a shame it wasn't turned into something more useful for a grape, like wine. But so I would possibly be going down a very different road in that reflection. Yeah. So it's sort of related to this mindfulness thing. So one of the things, and you talked about people not really having the rich inner life and the reflecting in their inner experiences in the workplace, and that's sort of one of the things that you bring. So there's two ways of doing this. I think one of them is mindfulness and teaching people these kind of skills, and the other one is dialogue. To get them to talk to each other. So you've already talked about mindfulness. How big a part does dialogue play in this practice?
I mean, absolutely crucial. Actually, Richard, for me, there's three parts. There's like the holy triad, right? The first is you have to understand your heritage. And when I say heritage, I don't just mean, you're British, you're Indian, whatever, but almost like the traits of all the people around you, especially your parents, etc., etc. You have to understand your past, because whether you like it or not, you are made up of generations and generations and generations that came before you. So, and science is showing, so neuroscience and epigenetics is showing that things that impacted your ancestors could still be impacting you, right? So I think as much as possible, you need to understand your past, your heritage. You need to understand yourself, which is the mindfulness. And you need to understand the way you interact with others, which for me is interactions. So those three things are very joined together for me. So interactions is absolutely essential. But if you're not reflecting on any of those interactions, then I don't know how much use you're getting. And I think a way of really enriching your life and coming back to life, which is what people are desperately trying to do at the moment, is interacting with others, finding social connection, finding belonging, and understanding that we are one complex adaptive ecosystem inside a multitude of complex adaptive ecosystems. And so if you don't start understanding those interactions, but also understanding why you feel something about that interaction, so understanding both parts, you're probably not going to find much peace.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I teach leadership in quite a similar way. That if you don't understand the discipline of leadership and the heritage of leadership, all of this has come before you, and you're born into it. Then you're not actually going to be a particularly good leader. So you're just sort of taking it into the cultural perspective. I still want to go a little bit further into dialogue. I'm a big fan of David Graeber's work, and David Graeber talks about you're only truly self-aware when in dialogue with another. Mm-hmm. And so there's even when you're thinking, quite often you think in a form of dialogue because you say, well, I would, you're arguing with somebody else. So yeah, that kind of stuff. So how do you? It's a really important thing for me is to get that dialogue happening well. Is there any special techniques that you do? Yeah. Because I know you're using very creative imagery and things, but how do you ensure the dialogue happens well? And then how do you build in that self-awareness?
Yeah. Beautiful question. And actually, so if you take my family, if you imagine a pie chart, a third are scientists, a third are doctors, and a third are teachers. Right. And so using all of that, and I'm an accountant, I came up with an equation, right? And this is the equation that I try and apply. It's time multiplied by the quality of interaction is proportional to the transformation that's caused, right? And very simply, just imagine 45 minutes in a classroom with a teacher when you were a kid. There were some classes that went so slowly because you just hated the teacher. There was no quality interaction there. So therefore, you probably didn't enjoy the subject. Transpose that to a really brilliant teacher who brought the subject alive. And all of a sudden, the transformation is huge because you're going to be like, I want to go and look this up. I want to look that up. We had a Latin teacher who made Latin sexy. And because of that, I went off and researched words and understood the etymology of words and how things, and I found learning languages easy. So I learned French and I learned Spanish. I spoke Romanian fluently when I lived there, and I managed to learn basics of Hungarian and Russian and Serbian, just because it was all patterns which I'd learned from Latin. So I really focus on the quality of interaction, and I break that down into three things. I break it down into, and it's physics, resonance, frequency, and amplitude. So can you resonate with the other person? And sorry, underpinning all of that has to be authenticity, because if you're putting it on, people will realize a mile off. So the first thing is, can you resonate with the person or the team? Can you stay on that frequency with them? Can you translate your ideas into their frequency? And then can you get them so ignited that they amplify? And then you've got real transformation. So that's actually what I use, Richard. You know, the first thing that I'll do with anyone that I meet or speak to is, and I'll ask them a bunch of questions so I can understand, you know, what do I know that could be useful to them, and what can I ask them about as well? So finding that lowest common denominator is the starting point in getting into frequency.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful way of doing, of explaining the vitality of dialogue. I think the notion of shifting it into physics. I found that quite interesting. I'm now going to segue to about as far away from physics as potentially we could go, although I think you might have an answer related to physics. You talked about using fiction.
Yeah.
What do you mean by using fiction?
Yeah, this is so exciting. One of my mentors was a guy called Alec Badamsi. He was an advertising guru in India, and he was also a theatre actor. And his advertising campaigns were so successful, he literally took unknown brands and made them billion-dollar companies because of his advertising. And everyone kind of acknowledges it in India. Now, what does he do? He, in an advert, takes you into a fantasy land, but takes you so far into that fantasy land that you come out of it 30 seconds later going, I want to buy that product. You don't realize that, but you will go and buy it, right? So I had that thought, and I also looked around and I tried to find something that was uniting as many people as possible. And one of the things was fiction. Now, the thing about fiction is, when we go into fiction, we are willing to give up the social norms that we're used to. And through fiction, we're willing to explore boundaries that we wouldn't normally. So, for example, a very strict Indian mother, right, will still watch a Netflix show about women having affairs or women working at large corporations, right? Because that's fiction. Now, why I think it's really good to use fiction is because you can create realistic scenarios in fiction that make somebody curious. Their amygdala is not going off because they know it's fiction, but you can help them solve problems that they've got using the device of fiction.
Can you give us examples?
Yeah, so okay, so in the series of books that I've written, which are called the Ojas Chronicles, that aren't out yet but will be out shortly, I've created these different worlds, and each world, you know, like there's the female world, there's a world that's totally run by children, because children are considered brighter than adults because they come in pure, they have really, really interesting ideas. Anyone who's spent time with children will know what imaginative, creative creatures they are, and we kind of dumb it out of them, to be honest, over the years. So there's a planet which is totally, you know, driven by children. So when people, so I had a group of students who were doing entrepreneurship at university. They were doing an MBA, and I was teaching them on this MBA program. And I said to them, I want you to create this children's world, and I want you to imagine it like that. So I gave them the scenario. This is what the kids are like, and this is how the parents react to them. now I want you to go off and further kind of develop this world. And they were able to do that, even though most of them came to me and said, I absolutely hate kids. Don't spend any time with them. They're brats. They're just noisy on planes. We don't like them. And they went from that to having this newfound admiration for kids because of this fictional world that they then started to explore. So they were forced to spend time with kids and understand how creative they were. And they suddenly started seeing the different ways they could now interact with children. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure that it did entirely.
Yeah, I mean, and so what other kind of worlds do you have, just so that we sort of you've got the female world and the children world. What are the other fictional?
So one of them is where they, in a lot of mysticism, they talk about a third eye, and it's supposed to be the all-seeing eye. It's the one that can see all perspectives. So my thing, going back to physics again, is that everything, so forget time. What we've got is we've got space and we've got matter, and there's some kind of vibration, right? And that's it, ultimately. So on this planet, instead of having the all-seeing eye, they have the all-listening ear. And it's basically an ear that can sense vibration. And it's so attuned that on this planet, they can hear what we think on Earth, but not what we say. So that's a power that they've got. So what if people could actually hear what we're thinking, but not what we're saying? And having talked to lots of psychologists, lots of friends, ministers, royalty, I ask, I'm shameless. I ask everyone. Once I see that they're feeling comfortable, I ask them anything. And you know what? The thing that's come back is, gosh, they would be miserable people if they could hear what's going on in our heads, right? It was really quite, and then I used it for a company. This was before COVID again, but it was with outsourcing centers to get them to really think about how their offshore center must be feeling when a particular dialogue is said to them. So, or what problems they must go through that are not being said. So what is it that's not being said? I think that's everyone immediately goes, oh my goodness, and they'll come out with something. And that's what they're thinking, their underlying is thinking. So getting people's first reactions to the worlds is a really good reflection of what's going on inside those people. It's never a random thought. Mm. So that's another world. It's basically Sunos is a planet of vibration and sound. There's another planet called Furo, where the brother-sister relationship is the most important relationship on the planet, not the husband-wife, not the other kinds of families. And it's platonic love, brother and sister, but it's that they look out for each other and each other's family. And that's the way it goes on that planet. And so, when I was writing about that planet and I was writing its history, they have movements as well, where sisters come up and say, we want sister rights, and brothers come up and say, we want brother rights. But the hierarchy on that planet is brother-sister is the most important relationship. Now, if that was the case, how would that change the dynamic? They're just very interesting questions. There's no right answer, but it's useful to it gives you a different perspective.
I still have more questions, but I've spoken too much. Oscar.
I'm really fascinated by those fictional worlds, and especially how you actually got to those worlds, right? How did you came to this?
I think all deep fiction, especially when it comes to other worlds, comes from a place of pain, Oscar, honestly. And for me, I think I started creating those worlds when I was at kind of my lowest point in my life, where kind of everything on the surface, everything looked beautiful and glossy, but underneath everything was cracking. And I was, I felt I was living in a world which was incredibly sexist, especially living in India. I felt I was in a world where I couldn't explain these concepts 15 years ago. They were all there, but I couldn't explain them. And I didn't know who to go to. I thought I was going mad, right? And so I started to say, what if there was a world that accepted, an aspect of me, right? That's how I started the first world, which was a killer. And I started thinking about the fact that I'd had a miscarriage. I had a miscarriage ages ago, and maybe 18 or 20 years ago. And I remember thinking, I wonder where that baby is. I'm sure that baby's somewhere. And then I went past a poster which talked about how many millions of female babies are killed in India before they're born. And then I started, being an accountant, started adding it up, just saying, if I look at the difference in birth rates between males and females in different areas, that's like 250 million females that haven't been born in the last 50 years, right? That's huge. Just think of how that would have changed conversations. And maybe it wouldn't, but I mean, for me, that was massive. And I was like, what if they had a voice? And then, so a killer was born as, this voice for all those aborted children will go and be born on this planet. So this planet has a lot of autistic kids, a lot of kids that have cerebral palsy, a lot of kids that are blind and disabled, but the way they live is just incredible. They live to the best of their abilities because that female planet has said, we want you to be comfortable. So in the blind zone, they don't need lights. And if the people who can see want to go into the blind zone, then they've got to live as the blind, right? So it's completely different. So, and once I got one idea, it spun another and spun another. And then my kids inspired me for Pluton. My kids were just so different to most of the other kids in India because the other kids have been put in classes ever since they were like -5. And I didn't want to do that to my kids. And so I just really listened to them. And so that's that. And then, honestly, the planet of Sunos, it came about because I was just so desperate for somebody to hear my cries. But nobody did because I didn't open up and nobody thought that I would be suffering. And it was just like, what if I could hear? What would I hear? So I don't know if that gives you.
Oh, that's a wonderful background. So how many fictional worlds have you developed so far?
Oh gosh, there are 9 major worlds in different galaxies. And then there's, 15, 20 minor worlds. But yeah, they're always coming every year. I think a point will come where I'll invent a planet each year. There'll be a new planet a year. Because I'm always getting ideas for them. So I've got a new one that I'm working on at the moment.
Excellent. Back to you.
I'm gonna zip back to that plurality of planets in a bit, but first I want to go back, if you're okay with it, to this painful kind of background, because you and I relatively recently were involved in a LinkedIn discussion where someone was just basically being really quite insulting towards you and suggesting you didn't deserve any of the honors that you've come your way, and that you so I just wonder if that is an experience that you've had through your life, because he was very, very, very specific to a certain demographic of white male. Yeah.
Look, I have to say I've had a mix of experiences, but no, I mean, one of my enduring childhood memories is being in a car and having skinheads trying to break the windows of the car. And I couldn't drive off because I was 6 years old. I was in the car. And, so that's one of my, first memories. And I remember being bullied. I've had Me Too incidences. I've been on boards of organizations that have been I've been the only female. It's been tough. the thing is, I got to say, I've asked for it. I mean, who told me to move to Eastern Europe? Who told me to move around Eastern Europe? Who told me to move to India? But I chose to do those things. But yes, it's been very difficult. I've faced a lot of isms over the years.
Could you go through a few of those that resonate?
Oh,
Because I've heard you do it before, and it's very powerful. So,
so obviously we've got sexism. Then in India we have casteism. So what's your surname? Where are you from exactly? We have casteism. We have colorism, which is to do with the color of my skin. I'm not fair enough. We have heightism. I've actually had people kind of look down and say, "Are you sure you've got a brain in there?" kind of thing. I've had ageism. That I had a partner in Switzerland from one of the big four companies actually walk out of the room saying, "Send me your boss. I can't believe you're the managing director of the international division of a listed company. I can't talk to you." I mean, he literally walked out of the room. So I've had, ageism. I've had every ism you can think of. That's all I can say.
And how much do these isms inform the planets?
Sorry, say again.
How much do the isms inform your planets?
Oh gosh, they help give me ideas. That's what gave me the ideas of the, well, if the brother-sister relationship is the most important, then there would be brother-brother rights and sister-sister rights. And it was always thinking about what do we have here, and how can we ridicule what we have here? Not that example, that example, because I think gay rights are really important. I think mixed marriage, whatever, LGBTQ, I think that's so important. But I also think that there are labels that we put on, like the caste system, that really should be well and truly decimated in today's age. I really believe that anything that's going to force people to stay in one spot, I think is just incorrect. I think it's against humanity.
So there's this focus on social mobility that's underpinning everything you're doing.
Mm.
And I think
social mobility and internal empowerment, and then trying to create the ecosystem around.
So you've shared a story with me before about social mobility in Indian villages and what you do with the parents there, I think.
Which one was it?
So I know there's a lot of them, and just go and visit. If you can go and visit that, because again, it was quite powerful that you were talking to mothers in villages and areas, things like that. So, how do you, if this is a driving passion for you and you're doing it throughout India, what kind of thing do you experience in these? So the Indian village life where social mobility is actually stopped because of the parents.
I've worked with an organization called Catalyst in India, and Catalyst pick up girls who are bright but not the brightest, because the brightest will get looked after wherever, they'll win awards and they'll get scholarships and everything, but the next layer down, they look after those girls. And they have to come from the villages. They have to come from a certain income family. And Catalyst, the organization, has mentors across India, mainly in Western India, where they mentor these girls for 2 years, right? Or 3 years during their degree. So in addition to them doing their degree, they're also getting these life skills. They do these extra sessions. And then those girls go off, and Catalyst also help them find jobs. So what happened with COVID was these poor girls so most of these girls are getting sponsored, so they get a stipend, so they're living in hostels in bigger cities and going to university. But with COVID happening, they all had to go back to their villages. So the first thing that Catalyst did was organize sort of mobile phones and reception and computers so that they could still do their classes and everything. Now the challenge that happened to these girls was they go back to the village, and loads of people are saying to them in the village, "You're wasting everyone's money. You're just going to get married. You're just going to go and live in the next village. Why are you doing all of this? You're setting a bad example to the rest of the girls." And I would have the girls crying in sessions with me, because I'd be talking to them about quality interaction. And they'd be like, you haven't met my dad. You haven't met my uncles, my mamas, my mummies, you know, these relatives. And I said, I know this is really hard for you to understand, but you need to understand what you're doing today by standing up to them and saying, no, I am going to get educated and I am going to go and work. And this is my right. Is you are training that village for 2 generations' time. You are going to experience the uncomfortableness. And I'm not going to lie to you, it's not going to get better. It's going to continue to be like this. But you are going to continue to be resilient if you all stick together and you really work together and show them how it's useful. Go and help those men, get onto the computers, check what the rainfall is. And if this rainfall continues, what's going to happen to the crop? Go give them ideas so they can see how the knowledge that you're getting could help them. But don't expect them to say thank you. Just know that this is service. This is you contributing. And that really helped them. It's not easy. I don't want to lie to them. It's not Cinderella. It's not going to be the Prince Charming comes off. It's not going to be like that. It is going to be continually, perpetually living the life of cinders, right? But making it better one step at a time so that future generations don't have to go through this.
Fantastic. And that's going to sort of cycle me back to the planets. Because this is another string to your bow. You know, you're doing all of these multiple things, and you've also talked about physics. So I want to look at this notion of quantum physics and the plurality and of, you know, that there's all of these plural interpretations and plural positions and paradoxes and things. How much do you bring of that kind of quantum rather than Newtonian physics into the world of work?
Oh gosh, so much. I mean, it's all about that, isn't it? We don't realize that when our boss shouts at us, he's not shouting at us. He's got 50 million other things going on in his head. And he's expressing that, unfortunately, on us, but we take it personally, for example. That's just a simple example of just looking 2 steps back. But really what you're saying is correct. We are complex adaptive ecosystems, right? And we may not think that Richard in, you know, Hong Kong, or Oscar in Hong Kong and Vandana in India may have anything in common, but there are things happening. If things happen to you, there is this knock-on effect, and there are these quantum. There's quantum entanglement. You know, things start to shift, and we've seen it. We've seen it time and time again. That one shift here can have an amazing impact over there. And so I think the more we can understand, and the thing is, you can only be aware of it, or no, that's the wrong way of saying it, actually. If you're not aware of it, you don't notice it. And so the idea of the pluralities of the worlds is the more you understand each of those worlds, the more you suddenly have a richer picture of what's going on here. And I think the more you can impact.
Excellent. I mean, it's how much of this work do you see going on? I mean, you're obviously doing it, and we try to do it. But you know, is it a big movement yet in India or
no, it's not. But you know what I can tell you is it is just under the surface now. I can see it. You know, you both know that I've got this book coming out with Alec Badamsi in March, and you know, Penguin, not just Penguin, but we've had 3 really big like authors, or one of them's like a multi-billionaire of India who sold his company to Disney for $2 billion. They've read the book, and the book is called Let Me Hijack Your Mind. So it is all about really disrupting social norms. And they all came back and said, oh my God, the world is so ready for this. I think it's happening, Richard. I think the problem is not enough people are talking about it. And I think what's really good is what you post on LinkedIn, what Oscar posts, what the whole of the DD crew are posting. It's showing that there's movement, but it's like anything. Like I always think of accounting. You have to aggregate things and then they become big. The problem is this is so, like, you're in Hong Kong, I'm in India, Mary's in Australia, Jeff is in the UK. We're small voices in small ponds. We almost need to read Professor Damon Centola and just say, how can we start creating more bridges? How do we make those wide bridges? How do we, make it zing like this and create more relevance, legitimacy, and credibility around this? Because this is the quickest and easiest way to cause change. It really is. What you're doing, what I'm doing, etc. In the same, it's quality of interaction. In the same 1 hour, the kind of conversation that you have in these forums accelerates your understanding and your business outcomes. I would say minimum 10x.
Well, I think you're preaching to the converted with Oscar and me. Oscar has a question, but I'm gonna ask you how you would preach to the unconverted next. But yeah. Oscar can go first.
It's a similar question because you about those little areas that we have around the planet. So, but how do we do this? Because it's happening, right? It is kind of within the, let's say, the community that we both are in. People talking about it, but yeah, they probably share the same sentiment. How do we make this bigger?
So I have something called a bhag. It's an Indian word. Bhag in Hindi means to run, right? But bhag, as in BHAG, also stands for big, hairy, audacious goal, right? And I think, hear me out now, this is my crazy $1 trillion idea, if it could only be implemented. I think there's scope to create a metaverse, right? I think we have to stop thinking about ourselves as Indian, British, Australian, professional, this, whatever. I think it's time for new labels. And I think we need to create a metaverse which is based on new labels. So I think it's about having conversations with people and starting to say, you're an igniter, you're a, what's the other one? And whatever. We've got to find these new, because they're the kind of work we're doing. There are no words that have been invented yet for this. And I think it's time to kind of start thinking about that. How should we be categorizing and labeling people in a way that will help enrich diversity, enrich our ecosystems? And if we can start doing that as a smaller group, then that's something that I think others start to pick up. So I think we should be thinking longer term about a metaverse.
Well, you're a chief alarmist. I'm an organisational misbehaviourist. There's a guy in Australia called Dr. Jason Fox who calls himself the arch wizard, I think.
Okay.
So there's some interesting labelling going on. I mean, it's that's, and I think most of the people that we interview in these, they all struggle to define themselves with the current level of language that we have. So I think, interesting 2 points. One is our language is not good enough, so we've got to enrich our language, and then that will take us back to the dialogues and the imagination of the worlds and all of these possibilities. And two is, because this is quantum, it's the connection, it's the relationships and the connections rather than the things that we need to be focusing on. So again, I'm going to sort of re-ask the question that Oscar just asked: is where is the in to those who are not currently listening?
Where is the in to those who are not listening? I think it's all about priming, Richard. I think understanding that it is a transition, it is a process. And I think there are people who are open, they're already converted. There are people who are open but not converted because they don't know. So the question is, how do we get out to them? And I think, so if we look at how I got to you, it was through Aman Zaidi in India. He told me about you. I came along. I then, reached out to you. You guys were so warm and welcoming. to my crazy ideas. I felt normal. And so it kind of moved things, right? So it is about a peer. I think it is very much about a peer network. It's about being recommended or getting out, and also getting you to speak at different places. I feel that, you know, there should be something designed that could go into cross-pollinated areas. So, for example, I'm part of an organization called TIE, and TIE is the Indus Entrepreneurs. It's all over the world, but it started off in Silicon Valley, and it was the South Indians and the Indians who had made a shitload of money, and then decided to come back to India and set up entrepreneurship. So there are chapters all over the world now of TIE, and I'm one of the charter members of TIE. I think you'd be a great speaker there. So how do we get you, or how do we get bigger interactions going on where there are decision makers so that they can hear this kind of dialogue? I think that's what we should be focused on. How could we create an event that we could invite the senior management of, let's say, Tata in India or Unilever Global? You know, how could we create something that they would want to be part of?
So it's a big challenge, yeah, and it keeps Oscar and I up at night.
Let's keep talking.
Yeah, we will, definitely. I'm going to move into our last question now, which is the same last question we ask everyone, which is the $9 trillion challenge. So the research that Oscar and I bounce off is this idea that current organizational and management practices are costing organizations $9 trillion a year in lost value creation or lost productivity, or however, even perhaps lost progression into innovative spaces and things like that. If all organizations were embracing your ideas, and you know, what would they look like in a way that would save them all of this value?
What would they look like in a way
that would save them all of this lost value?
Gosh, they would map their energy ecosystem. That's what they would do. They would map their energy ecosystem. They would look at the organization not through the eyes of jobs and responsibilities, specific responsibilities, but they would map people within the organization for the cognitive diversity that exists and experiential diversity that exists, and then put people on projects. And they would also give, I think they should give up to a third of every day for self-development if they want a sustained future workforce. And within that self-development would be connection, belonging, connection. I don't like the word inclusion, but I like the word belonging a lot, and unity. I think when you bring those into an organization, people thrive. People thrive, and they will do what's right.
Wonderful.
Is that the metaverse world that you're describing? I don't know.
I think, if we had more places where we could do honest brainstorming, I think the world would be a different place.
Thanks a lot, Vandana, for talking with us, and Richard as well.